On this video, I'm just doing a little quick video on the last 4 questions. I'm just noticing a lot of us are kind of struggling with this, so I'm going to run through this with you guys. Okay. Now, on this cosine one, they wanted you to use this particular dot as your start. Okay. So we need to figure out where that is. Also on these, I would recommend starting out by drawing your vertical shift. Okay, so here you can see that's kind of half the distance here. So I know first off that my K is going to be a -1. That means I'm going to be subtracting 1 at the end. Okay, so K is going to equal -1. Also from this, I see that I'm starting at the high. So I'm really going from here to here. This is where I'm going to focus. So let me just sketch that real quick. I'm going from here. Whoops, too fat. I'm going from here to here. That's just what your cosine looks like. And we're going from high to high, okay? From this point to this point. And so this is going to be a positive A because I'm starting above, okay? If I start at my low, then that would have been a negative A. And so I'm 1, 2 units above. And again, it's going to be positive. So my A is going to be 2. Now, in terms of where I'm starting at, okay, this point right here is where I'm starting. And this is a pi thirds. Okay, so half of a pi thirds would be pi 6. So let me just get that in here. Okay, so this is actually going to be pi 6. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4 pi 6, which is really 2 pi thirds, 5 pi 6. So I'm going to be traveling from pi 6 to 5 pi 6. So I need to figure out that distance. Okay. So I'm going to basically be subtracting 5 pi 6 minus pi 6. So let me just do that up here. So I'm going to go 5 pi 6 minus pi 6, which is 4 pi 6. So that's my period. Now I can reduce that to 2 pi thirds. Now remember, your period is equal to 2 pi over b, okay? So since my period is equal to 2 pi over b, that means my b is going to be 3, okay? So I know my b is going to be 3. The other part I need to know is where my start is, and I see my start right here. This is my start. So that is going to be x minus pi 6. Okay, that's going to give me the x minus pi 6 part of my equation. So now let me write my equation. Okay, so I'm going to write it right down here. So this is going to be y equal, my a is 2, cosine, my b was 3, and then my phase shift is the thing that goes in the parentheses. So I'm starting at pi 6, so it's going to be an x minus pi 6. And then I shifted it down 1, minus 1. So that is your answer for the first one. Okay, that's how we end up getting it. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at letter B. So on letter B again, let's start by kind of figuring out where our vertical shift is. So that's where my vertical shift is going to be. So that is 1 above my x-axis. So that means my K. Hold on, let me get that line back. That means my K is equal to 1. Okay, my K is 1. Now that also is going to help me with my amplitude. So you see I'm going 2 above, and you also see that this is where I'm starting. So let me just draw where I'm focusing. This is the cosine I'm focusing on. That's the one they want me to do. Okay, so again, it's from high to high. Okay, and so this is going to be a positive A again, and I'm going 2, so my A is going to be 2. Now, I need to also figure out my phase shift, okay? So you'll notice that it's halfway between my pi halves and my pi, because that's where my sines would have had my 2, 0. So halfway would be like my 1, for example. So halfway between pi halves and pi, well, maybe it's easier to think here. Halfway between 0 and pi would be a pi fourth, okay? So this would be 1 pi fourth. Let me just write pi fourth so we know what it is. A little smaller. So this would be pi fourths. This would be 2 pi fourths, 3 pi fourths. So this is 3 pi fourths. 4 pi fourths is pi. 5 pi fourths. 6 pi fourths. I mean, sorry, 5 pi 6. Well, no, it's 4. So I'm running, I don't know why I wrote a 6 there. Okay, lost my count. I was thinking 6 was going to be the next one. So pi fourths, 2 pi fourths, 3 pi fourths, 4 pi fourths, 5 pi fourths. And then this would be 6 pi fourths. And 6 pi fourths does reduce down to 3 pi halves. And then this is going to be 7 pi fourths. So you'll notice that I'm basically going from 3 pi fourths to 7 pi fourths. Okay, that is my period. Okay, so I'm going to be taking 7 pi fourths minus 3 pi fourths, which ends up being 4 pi fourths. Let me just rewrite this a little better. I'm going to zoom in for a sec just to write it. So this is 7 pi fourths minus 3 pi fourths, which is 4 pi fourths, or just pi. I've traveled pi distance. Okay, I traveled pi distance. Now remember, our b is how many cycles we have within 2 pi. So I can count that. It probably would have been easier to count it with my sine. But I already know my period. And so I know my period is 2 pi over b. That's always the formula. And we just found out that our period is pi. So I can cross multiply and solve, but I think if you look at this, you can see that my b would have to be 2. So I know my k, my a, my b, and I actually know my h, because right here, this is where they wanted us to start. They put that point there. That's at 3 pi fourths. So this is going to be x minus 3 pi fourths. So my equation is going to be, let me get a little bigger here, y equal my a, which is 2, cosine my b, which is 2, my phase shift, x minus 3 pi fourths, and then my plus 1. And that's going to be my equation. A little fatter highlighter. That's going to be my equation. So now let's take a look at C and then D. And as we do more and more of these, and we're going to focus on doing this more on Monday and Tuesday, it'll get easier. So again, let's figure out our vertical shift. So it looks like it's going to be there at 2. So that means my K is going to be 2. Also, I know that I'm starting here, so I'm going from here to here. So let me just kind of draw that. That's where we're going. So this time, my amplitude, the A is actually going to be negative because I'm starting from my low to my low. Okay, so that means it's going to be a negative A. And I'm going 1 unit down. So my A is going to be -1. Okay, so I'm going 1 above and 1 below, but I'm starting at the negative. Because normally your cosine should start at the high, okay? And they wanted us to start from this point to this point. Now, where am I starting? I'm not starting here at 0, I'm starting at pi. So that means this is going to be x minus pi. That's like my x minus h part of my, part of the equation. And then we need to figure out the length of the period. Now, here, if I'm going from here to here, it's really hard to tell because this isn't landing in a nice spot. However, in this situation, so I find it different ways depending on the problem, okay? In the other problem, I could easily identify start and end nicely. And so I could figure out what the period was. Here, I'd kind of be guesstimating, and I don't want to be guesstimating with pies and fractions. So what I do notice is that your B is how many cycles of cosine or sine, okay, depending on the graph, we have from 0 to 2 pi, or even if it's not from 0 to 2 pi distance. Now, in this case, I'm literally going from 0 to 2 pi. And let me just kind of draw them in for us, okay? Now, I know we're focusing on this one here, but what I'm going to do is let me just kind of draw in. Here's one cosine. Here's two. Let me do that in a different color. Two cosine. Oops, kept the same color. Two cosine. Now, again, I'm going to be kind of tracing over this. I'm looking for the blue portion, which is the bottom part of this, but I want you to see there's one cosine, two cosines. Let me get a totally different color. Okay. Three cosines. So if I can look from and within 2 pi distance and I can count how many full cycles I have, that's your B. So in this case, my B is going to be 3. So I have all the pieces, okay? Got all the pieces. So now I'm going to put it together in my equation. Okay, let me move this. So I have y equal my A, which is -1 or just negative, cosine, because again, I'm doing the blue portion right here, okay? Normally my cosines look like this, like the red and the green and the purple. When it's this way, it's negative. So negative cosine 3, okay? Because I had 3 full cycles. And then I started at pi, so x minus pi plus 1. And that is going to be our equation. So now let's do the last one. So on this one, we don't have a full anything here. It does look like this would be like our center, okay? And that we're almost going to have the whole cosine here, but we don't quite. Or if you want to think about it, we have kind of half of a sine, and then we're going to start the other half. So that's our center. So that means my K is a -1. Okay, so my K is a -1. And I'm starting here. So let me just, again, trace where we're focusing. I'm focusing from here. And I'm going here and then continuing, and it's off our graph, okay? But this is where I'm starting, okay? So that means that this is going to be x minus pi because I'm starting at pi. I've shifted it to pi. So that would be my h part of it. Now I am 1 above this line. And again, I'm starting at the high. So that means my a is going to be 1. And then in terms of my B, okay, when I do these, I look at the graph, and sometimes it's easier to think of it as the sine. Sometimes it's easier to think of it as the cosine. For me, in this situation, your cosines go from high to high or low to low. Your sines are the ones that go, you have your zeros, okay? So I want to focus on, let me get green for this, just to get a different color. I want to focus on starting here to here. This would really be half of a sine graph. And then I would continue and I would have the other half and it would come like this. Now you'll notice in 2 pi distance, remember how we talked about if I know 2 pi distance? In 2 pi distance, I had half of a sine graph. Well, if I have half of a sine graph, I would also have half of a cosine graph. It just would be shifted, but within 2 pi distance, regardless of where it's starting, if I have half of a sine, I also would have half of a cosine. So the only thing that's going to change if I define a graph as a sine or a cosine, your amplitude won't change the number, but the sign might change. Your plus or minus going up or down is not going to change. The B is not going to change, which is what I'm focusing on right now, but your start might change. So the only things that might change is your A in terms of signs, not actual number, and then this X minus H, okay? But in this case, if I'm looking at this as a sine from here to here and in 2 pi distance, I have half of a sine in 2 pi distance. That means my B is 1/2. Now my cosine would be the same situation. It's just shifted. So I don't have to worry about going, well, would it be different for cosine? No, it would be exactly the same. So again, sometimes depending on the graph, it's easier for me to see the zeros than the highs or the lows, okay? So sometimes I think of it in terms of a sine, and sometimes I might think of it in terms of a cosine. So this is going to be y equal A is 1, cosine, my B is 1/2. I started at pi, so this is x minus pi, and then minus 1. So hopefully you'll find this helpful in trying to write these as cosines, okay? Today in class, or yesterday, depending on when you had me, we talked about the sine graphs, okay, which are very similar process, okay? So hopefully this helps, and good luck.